Okay, now I think you can start, Lesley.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nina. Okay, good morning and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for the breakout session. I hope that those of you who attended the earlier session found it interesting. I think Caroline and Dominic were incredibly dignified in what they were saying and very powerful in their approach and response to the questions being posed to them. So massive thanks to them. I'm Lesley Tudor-Snodin. I'm one of the project managers at National Energy Action, and I'll be chairing this session. There are 2 breakout sessions now taking place. This is breakout 1, and we'll cover ideas on how to provide effective energy advice. If you're meant to be in the other session, which is about preventing self-disconnection, the link to that session is on NEA's website and in any joining instruction emails that you'll have got through. These breakout sessions are intended to provide delegates with a means of informing NEA and other attendees' responses to the current energy crisis, and will also help inform our upcoming UK Fuel Poverty Monitor report, which will be published in November. The format of the session is that we will start with a contribution from leading experts across energy advice, retail markets and local delivery. They'll give a short introduction to the topic and their insights, and then the floor will be open to you seeking a response to those ideas and contributing your own. Peter Sumby, NEA's Director of Operations, will be collating the feedback, and he will also be the one taking over should there be any internet issues and I end up disappearing. The session's been recorded. If you're not happy with that, you have the opportunity to leave now. And all recordings will be available on NEA's YouTube channel after the conference for those who wanted to hear more from the other sessions. So this session will explore the main ways that the advice community can work effectively this winter. This includes helping raise awareness of the current support, improve the accessibility of help offered, and identify and support those most at risk so as not to leave anyone behind. Panellists will have about 5 minutes, well, 5 to 10 minutes each for their initial remarks on these topics, and this will be followed by question and answers from the online audience, and then final reflections from the panellists. I have a feeling it may work out that this session becomes more of a cathartic outlet for everyone. That's okay, all thoughts are welcomed. Can I just ask once more, because there's more people just joined us, that you are muted to prevent any background noise, and I'll ask you to join in during the question and answer part. So as a way to get things started, I want to pose a few thoughts, and at the moment I don't have the answers to these, but it's intended that today with a collective mind we can work towards it. So I'm just going to share my screen a moment. And we'll start by looking at this. So these are just a few ideas to get us started with this and how we can provide effective advice. So why are we looking at this? So starting with the spotlight on fuel poverty, is a bit of an old banner stand there, if anyone was around long enough and ago to recognise that one. Having fuel poverty and energy efficiency in the spotlight with householders now paying attention, it gives us a great platform. So how do we use this? Are we all aligned in our messaging? Should we be saying the same thing, or should we concentrate on offering individual services and work to link those services better together? With this in mind, I'm going for an advisor first push on this. So on LinkedIn a few weeks ago, somebody had posted an article about the cost of living crisis and their thoughts on the increase in service leaders seeking to use the support services, and how advisors are now having to choose who they help and who gets turned away. Someone had read this and commented that it'll be hard, but we can't bury our heads in the sand about this. We just need to get on with it. And whilst I don't disagree with that, I think we are all just getting on with it as best we can and putting in as much preparation as possible to make sure we can help as many people as possible this winter. I couldn't help but think, I don't think that it should be for energy advisors to make that decision. They should not be the ones having to make that difficult choice. So how has it got to this point? Advisors are generally in a role as they want to help people, in many cases going above and beyond. The increase in people we have seen seeking support means we can't offer as comprehensive or effective a service anymore, and the relentlessness of casework has now taken its toll. Same day, different article and a different comment, someone had highlighted that the salary of the staff working at a food bank wasn't that much more than the people using the service. We've got to keep in mind that a lot of people will have their own struggles going on, yet will be coming into work and taking on those of the people that they're helping. Secondary trauma amongst advisors is now a big problem, as is the compassion fatigue that will ultimately follow. Chronic underfunding of other services, such as mental health and advocacy, means that we have a lot of clients who are overwhelmed and struggling after a decade of austerity, COVID, and now a cost of living and energy crisis. Advisors are often the first to show compassion and present a listening ear, and they become the sounding board more increasingly to ill-mannered and aggressive clients, especially when trying to tell somebody something they don't want to hear. So what do we do to best support our teams? Because without them, there is no support. They need to come first. And finally, my last point on this, read the room. Now, I imagine most organisations here today will have been in a position at some point when something that's been said has been twisted or taken out of context, or where an ill-judged piece of advice has gone out and become centre focus online, usually for all the wrong reasons. And I imagine there are people in the audience today who'll cringe at any mention of star jumps and hugging pets. And we've had it within NEA with our Warm Homes campaign, when we had to change our campaign scarves for mugs when the media decided that what we were doing was advocating people wear warm clothes and woolly scarves in the house rather than addressing any sort of political issue. We're starting to get feedback from clients that our hints and tips are misplaced. And we're seeing a lot of social media backlash towards people offering energy saving advice. Many households have got little hope of being able to afford their energy this winter. The reason people are struggling with their bills isn't because they're wasting energy. They're political and they're economic, and pushing a narrative of personal responsibility at this time when what's needed is systematic change does not come across well. What should we be replacing this advice with so it's more beneficial and less patronising? And then how do we deliver the practical advice in a useful way? So with that in mind, I'm going to pass over to the panel so we can generate a practical discussion on how we address these concerns, along with others that may be raised in the session, and hear more about the useful work and best practice happening to help us work towards a creative and effective service this winter. So I'd like to introduce and invite to speak Dr. Elizabeth Blakelock, who's the Principal Policy Manager at Citizens Advice.
Thank you. I was absolutely cringing to see the tin foil behind the radiators coming up. I was doing a very similar thing to Martin Lewis on that news clip, burying your head in the hands when you think of the radiators, which probably won't be turned on this year. And the idea that some foil behind them is what's going to make a difference this winter. So yes, sorry, I'm being distracted by the tinfoil, but I'm Dr. Elizabeth Blakelock, and I lead one of the teams at National Citizens Advice, the Energy Retail Markets team. And what that means is that every time anyone comes to Citizens Advice, whether that's their accessing web content, calling our consumer service, or going to one of our brilliant Citizens Advice on High Street, GP surgery, each one of those people, each time there's that interaction, there's some kind of data footprint. And I see all of that evidence come through my team. So what I'm going to start with today is just a few of the highlights. It's difficult to think of them as highlights, but the significant trends that we're seeing come through from the services. It'd be great to see in the chat if it's similar to what you're seeing. I know there's many people who are directly providing similar support here today. So I said that something I spend a lot of time is data coming through. I've been a bit of a nightmare boss earlier on this year because of the amount of extra quality analysis I was asking for, turning back reports that were coming through, because despite the fact that I've been in the energy sector since 2002, the scale of the demand is beyond anything I've ever seen. I honestly thought that 2008 was going to be the most intense period of needing to support people with affordability challenges. And I didn't think we'd ever see anything like that kind of crisis. And that assumption was really challenged during COVID, as we saw so many people turning to Citizens Advice for support in such an unexpected and dreadful time. To be standing in front of you now and looking at this crisis is mind-boggling. We had as many people contacting us because they couldn't top up their prepayment meter in July as we did in January. It took me weeks to get my head around the fact that this was not going to be a year where we saw a summer decline in contacts of self-disconnection. Instead, we would continue to see them go up and up and up as people started turning off their fridges, deciding that they wouldn't be cooking at all for their family, and making those incredibly difficult decisions, juggling a very small budget. And a shift in the type of advice from an outcome where people would be able to meet all of their commitments, meet all their debts, to one where people instead were managing negative budgets. and the scale of that increasing so significantly. What I see most at the moment coming through is people who need crisis support. We're helping more than 2 people every minute with access to crisis support. That's trying to get them to a food bank or a food voucher or a fuel voucher, being able to make sure that people can meet those most basic needs. As an academic, I would have talked about this as being managing destitution, an amount of need that I didn't think I'd ever see in my lifetime. When we're providing that kind of crisis support, I don't think it'd be a surprise to many of you on the call to hear we've also seen, not just within our services, but in conversations with people providing support, if that's in an energy supplier or other organisations, an increase in the number of people who are expressing an intent to turn their life because they are so overwhelmed by the crisis that they're facing. So instead of in 2022, post-COP in Glasgow, talking about renewable energy in people's homes, bespoke advice to update their home, and the importance of having that trusted conversation about transforming people's lives to meet net zero. Instead, we seem to have gone back decades trying to get people to be able to meet those most basic of needs. I'm quite often asked then, obviously there's no silver bullet. How are we going to shift from, how are we going to acknowledge the fact that people are in these deep crises, but we want them not only to be able to survive this short-term crisis, but also to have access to long-term solutions like energy efficiency, which ultimately are going to make the difference. And I think if there is a silver bullet, it will be in being able to support people and build relationships, trusted relationships between organisations and those individuals, so that when they come for crisis support, the support and advice that they get in that moment means they're building a trusted relationship that will then mean that they look into or are supported through getting that longer term intervention, for example, in regards to energy efficiency. I think it's particularly important to remember, though, that we can't isolate energy advice in a box and not acknowledge the need for more holistic support. It's particularly striking to me about the expectations around individuals who rent from a private landlord, their expectations on them to be able to negotiate changes to the fabric of the building, despite the fact that we know that many people who are struggling have very difficult relationships with their landlord or would prefer not to interact with them at all if they can avoid it. Before I hand over to the next speaker, I wanted to highlight what this could feel and look like. I think we've focused a great deal, and rightly, in previous years on when we're thinking about long-term positive interventions in housing fabric in terms of public engagement and consumer education, so that people understand that there are options out there as a member of the public in terms of intervening and having a more warm and safe home, and understanding there are advisors out there ready to support you. What I think we need to acknowledge now, though, is that there's the interlinked but separate areas of the idea of having trusted advice, independent and impartial advice, as we see more and more people less willing to contact their energy supplier, which is where we would usually direct people as a first option to get support to be able to afford their energy bill. I feel that we have to acknowledge that energy suppliers are not well trusted and are very likely to only become less trusted as we go through this period of crisis. And more of a focus, so that's thinking about trusted independent advice. I think we've also got to acknowledge a shift away from one-off interactions to a more casework management. If we've got people who are able to engage with an organisation from crisis through to making longer-term changes to their home, we need to acknowledge that is a very different and more intense relationship, and that will therefore have impacts on the funding structures that we draw on to deliver that. And finally, on redress, this links back to that trust. But when things do go wrong, particularly with energy efficiency installs, so loft insulation in particular, or an eco measure where there might have been some expectations set incorrectly, and people feeling that they have got somewhere to turn when things go wrong, so that they aren't left in a worse situation than at the beginning of their journey. So I think I put forward a plea really to remember that the type of advice that we've known for many years that we will need to help to support people through into the future will be highly tailored, bespoke advice that acknowledges someone's broader context, not just an individual point in time. But that ultimately what people need now is that crisis support, which can be the beginning of a journey, but really that focus at the moment being very much on being able to meet those basics. I'm now going to hand back to Lesley to take us to our next speaker.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was fantastic. It also echoes a lot of my thoughts on this as well. So NEA delivered the WASH advice service, Warm and Safe Homes, and it was quite new to us in the way we did things as of around 2018-19. And it was just for advisors to have a central place for clients to ring in so they didn't miss calls when they were out and about. When COVID hit, obviously that service completely changed, and we saw an increase within the first 4 months of COVID of over 400% into the advice service. Now, we thought that would go back down to pre-COVID levels. It hasn't, and as of the same time period this year, it has risen by another 180%. So we're having to increase our services accordingly. And as you say, it isn't just basic energy advice, hints and tips anymore, which is what we were previously funded to deliver. This is crisis, this is complex casework. And as such, we are having to change the funding structures and how we seek funding going forward. So really interesting to hear that as well. I'm going to pass on to Rachel Jones now, who's Chief Executive of Acton Energy.
Lovely, thank you, Lesley. I'm going to endeavour to share my screen. So if you can shout, Lesley, when it does share, because it does some strange things when I use Zoom. So hopefully, if you can see, do let me know.
Yep, that's fine.
We can. You're not in presentation mode though for us, Rachel, if you'd like to try.
Okay, that should hopefully. Is that on into presentation mode?
We can see your actual speaker notes as well. Are you using two screens?
Yes, I am.
Yeah,
yes.
that usually makes it a bit difficult. It might be better than if you go back to where the original, because we can still see your slides and it's not really a problem.
That's fine, because there's not anything particularly exciting in my speaker notes anyway. Okay. So
okay.
there's nothing in there that says say something here, say something there. So you're all right there. So if people don't mind, it's the joys of having two screens, I think, really, and not really being an IT person. So good morning, everyone, and thank you, NEA, for asking us to come and speak today. It would have been lovely to see you all in person, because we are actually based in the West Midlands, where we were meant to be this morning. So we operate across Birmingham, the Black Country, and the Shire counties around the West Midlands, just to give you an idea of where we're based. And as Acton Energy, we've been providing energy advice since 1998. So we've been at it for some time, to say the least. Was set up by a local authority really to support their residents, and it's sort of grown from there, really, just to give you a bit of background. So from our point of view, when we're looking at advice, it really comes in two sort of key ways. We have telephone advisors that are based in the office in Warwickshire, and then we have the community outreach team. And I have to say, as was said earlier, 99% of all our calls are from people in a crisis. So our energy advisors are are taking unprecedented numbers of calls. I looked at some figures last week, and in August, which is normally, when I say normally, it hasn't been quite for some time, but we were taking on average probably about 1,500 calls-ish during a regular August. It's now over 3,500 calls in August. And at the moment, already in September, the call numbers are unbelievable to what we're receiving at the moment. I have to say, the last week they have been a bit quieter, but people are calling us really with all the issues that you'd expect for them to be calling us on. And then we have community outreach workers. So more often than not, quite a lot of our advice team will take the initial call, really see what support they can provide, and more often than not, those residents, those householders will be passed on to our community outreach team, who are based in the community, as the word says, and they're able to either visit people in their home, they meet people at events, It's really about empowering communities from our point of view. And so the advice that we give for our really based on what was said earlier by Elizabeth, it's about having consistent quality advice. Up to date is really, really key, and also what the customer is asking. At the moment, they certainly are not keen to be told that they need to put half a kettle of water onto board to save money. You know, they really want some practical advice about what's out there and what support's available for them. So for us, it's about having some really key and clear messaging. So, for example, the biggest thing at the moment for us is what actually is the price cap. What does that really mean? Particularly as we're taking a lot of calls at the moment where people are saying, we've put aside £2,500, that's going to take us over the winter months. And it's like, well, actually, that might not be enough. Actually, we're looking at your kilowatt hours, your price cap is based on, and your standing charge. So it's really getting some of those key messages out there and working with other organisations to do that. So really what support is out there and what local support is out there. So from our point of view, the key one there would be working with the local authorities to make sure that the advice across the piece, so the local authorities, other partner organisations, whether it be citizens advice, local age concern, quite a lot of the food banks are really keen to engage in the whole advice piece. So it's just making sure that the messaging is clear, simple, and is available to all those in different formats. So whether people are digitally minded or the digitally excluded. So that's really, really key for us. Particularly as there's an awful lot of national support out there, but people don't know what it is and where to find it. So I think it's one of those pieces out there. There's the energy piece, but there's that wider cost of living piece. And for us, it's about trying to make sure those two things are together. And then really around that local information, there's some dreadful acronyms there, so I do apologise. The household support fund, sort of the general sort of energy efficiency schemes there. So things like the local authority delivery schemes or the home upgrade grant schemes. The latter of those two are probably a bit further along down the line. So if someone's in a crisis, then really it might be the household support funds that are available locally, what that might be for a customer, how they can access that scheme. Then once you've been working with that customer, and it might be they need some quite complex, detailed casework done with them, that you can move them forward onto the sort of more energy efficiency schemes. And for us, that customer journey, I hate the word journey, but it's been overused a lot at the moment, but the customer journey is really, really important. So for us, it's about providing a clear process of how any scheme might run. So many of you will be aware, a lot of schemes that are out there at the moment, particularly some of the household support funds, can be quite complicated. So we've produced we've got an evidence guide. So if people have got to provide evidence, it's really broken down simply as to what that might look like. So we've actually taken pictures of bank statements and arrows and all the rest of it of what needs to be done and what they needed to provide so they can access that support. So some real practical guidance to householders and what's needed to be provided. And I think our experience, one of our key things we found, particularly for delivering some of the energy efficiency programs, is timescales. And they may be really broad for those on the call that are delivering any of these schemes. They'll be very, very aware that many of these schemes start at A and sometimes finish around B, C, D, and they move quite a lot. And it's just making sure that we keep householders up to date on what that process is, and a real key sort of contact for them to make sure they know what's happening. So, that real key process. So we provide a customer journey support sheet, for example, so they know exactly how the process works, which then actually frees up phone lines so that people that actually need the crisis support can get through. So it does benefit ourselves as advisors going forward. The community messages, I think I've already said, really, really important that we link with other agencies and we all work together on this. So, for example, we have a regular cost of living meeting with one of the local authorities we work with Bromsgrove District Council every month. All the key sort of agencies get together to look at the messaging that we're giving out. How's that working? What does that look like? Really, really important to make sure we're getting that out to those that really support that really needs it. And I wanted to quickly touch, because I am touching on, because I'm very conscious of time, is the support for staff. So I think it was mentioned the calls that we're taking are very different to the early days when I very first started doing energy advice. There was calls on people might want some loft insulation. They might be calling to find out can they switch, or they might be calling about looking at a renewable scheme. The calls we're getting are very, very complex. People are often quite stressed. they're quite angry, not at the advisor, but just generally angry because they're frustrated. And it's about providing support for staff through those really challenging times. So just so you're aware, our energy advisors particularly are all based in our office. None of them are home based. They were over COVID, but we found it was really, really challenging. So we quite quickly got them back into the office. So we're able to provide support to staff after they've been having challenging or difficult calls that they may be having. So we have trained a series of our staff to be mental health first aiders, which works very, very well indeed. And as part of that process, we have regular debriefs. So we get together and talk about some of the cases that we're dealing with, any challenges that are coming up on a regular basis. And then we also have the ability to refer some of those complex caseworkers. So we actually have a complex caseworker. We're trying to get more of them if we can get the funding to do it, but we have a complex caseworker who really deals with those much more challenging specialist cases that might take quite a long time. It might be a 6-12 months process of dealing with those particular clients. And I know my colleague Alvine, who's not on the, I don't think, well, she might be on the call with us, but my colleague Alvine has that role within our office, and she's got clients that she's still working with 18 months on because their needs are really high and they need the support there. We also offer something called emotional intelligence training and support, which I think probably puts the fear of God into most people. But actually, it's been a fantastic piece of work that we've done with staff, and it's made a huge difference with supporting them. It's really about blending how you think and feel so that you can make the best sort of decisions. A really good example of that is an organisation called 6 Seconds, who run a lot of the emotional intelligence courses. And there's something called the 6-second rule, so that when you're having a conversation, and it can be quite a challenging conversation, before you make a response, you take 6 seconds to think about that response. Is that the appropriate response, or am I rushing ahead, or is it going to make me feel something in a particular way before you make that response? It's about what we call consequential thinking. So every choice and reaction has a cost and a benefit. So it's really about asking yourself really whether you're responding carefully, or are you on autopilot? Am I automatically saying that this person should have X, Y, and Z, whereas really perhaps I need to think about it in a slightly different way, and what other ways I can support them. So I've been doing quite a lot of work on this with our own staff, and it's been really, really useful. I'm more than happy to take a bit more information offline if people are interested, but for us, staff wellbeing has been a real challenge. And I suspect it has for other advice agencies as well, particularly if you've got volunteers. I would imagine volunteers and the advice service is really, really difficult at the moment. So that's what I'm very conscious of time, but that's where I was going for now. And if anyone's got any questions after the Q&A, then do let me know. And I'll stop sharing there, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rachel. That was brilliant. A couple of things I picked up from that. Up-to-date advice. We really struggled with that, as many people did earlier on this year, when people were phoning us, asking us what was happening with home discount, what emergency measures was the government putting in. And we just had, our advisors were on the front line there having to tell people that we didn't know, and it made for very awkward conversations. So where that up-to-date advice comes from is also a big push that we need to kind of keep shouting about. Staff wellbeing, as I mentioned earlier, that is one of my major concerns, especially going forward. We've also brought in the mental health training, and we did some professional boundaries training if people are interested and want to hear more about that, and speak to the team and find out how they feel about that side of things. And we've also brought in just recently a duty manager who was on shift at any point during the day on a rolling rota basis. So if people do have those difficult calls, they can call one of us and just offload a bit. Because we are still at home, and a lot of team are external to head office, so we'll never be back in an office situation. And the escalation route that you've put in, that is something that we are looking to implement as well. So the complex cases that people just get stuck on and are taking up so much time, hopefully will be funneled into a named advisor, so we can try and kind of bring that down. So really good to hear more about what you're doing there. I'm going to pass over now on to Paul Winney. He is Head of Household Energy Services for CSE.
Thanks a lot, Lesley. Yes, and thank you for NEA for inviting me along today. That's great. My name's Paul Winney. I work for the Centre for Sustainable Energy. We have a telephone advice line and a team of caseworkers to provide in-depth long-term support. And recently our team has grown to over 50 in the advice team now. And also, as Rachel just touched on there as well, we too offer a wide range of support to our advisors. So in answer to the question, sort of how we can work effectively this winter, we need to make sure that we're well linked and connected with other agencies locally. So each of our organisations' expertise will be vital to ensuring those most vulnerable can get the support they need this winter. So I thought I'd give you just a few examples of what we're doing in Bristol. We've set up the Bristol Cost of Living Crisis Coordination meetings. So that is a working group with Bristol City Council and key advice organisations like Citizens Advice, North Bristol Advice Centre, CSE and others. We meet for an hour each week to discuss what support is available to people. As you're all aware, it's changing frequently and updating frequently. So things like financial support locally, vouchers for prepayment meters, surviving winter funds. And what we're doing is we're collating all of that information from all the different agencies. We discuss what other financial support is available within these meetings, what local and national heating and insulation grants are available. And then we ensure that we disseminate to all of the partners to advise their customers. And the coordination meetings are also getting ready to set up welcoming spaces, or some of you might know them as warm spaces, which we're going to put under 3 tiers so that there is the best support across the city from as many organisations and groups as possible. The first tier will be open to all, and it will be run by local organisations that have a range of things available like food, blankets, clothes, internet access. There will be staff on hand to give advice and support to those people. And these organisations will aim to get some funding from Bristol City Council to help cover their costs, like their own energy bills. Tier 2 will be less formal groups, like single parent groups or older persons groups. And these venues that are going to be open anyway, but they might not be in the local area and people might need to travel to get to them. And finally, the third tier will be sort of ad hoc spaces. So, for example, it could be a film night in a local pub or a talk in a village hall. And again, those businesses and organisations are seeking funding to cover the cost for their energy. And then the council is putting all of this together to create a sort of central resource so that people can see what's going on across the city with regards to these welcoming spaces. Bristol City Council, along with Citizens Advice, CSE and Shelter, have also recruited 30 cost of living volunteers trained by Citizens Advice to provide in-depth money advice, trained by CSE to provide energy advice, and Shelter to give information on housing and homelessness. And these volunteers will be at these welcoming spaces. And in some cases, for example, CSE will go along and we might give a talk on energy saving or conduct, for example, draft proofing or reflective radiator panel demos. Our Bristol food banks are also partnering with us as well. And our energy advisors are actively giving out vouchers to people. And we also go along to them in person as well. We're working with Trussell Trust, where we attend a food bank each week to give advice and support. And we also, as a consequence to that, receive lots of referrals as well into our service for energy advice. And we're also working with the home banks as well. So they provide items like homeware items, saucepans, blankets, in addition to food. And also we need to make sure that our advice is current and credible still. So thousands of people experiencing unaffordable energy bills calling CSE's energy advice line for support, and they've been asking what they can do and even if they should stop paying their bills altogether. We've compiled a page on our website specifically looking at what happens if you can't or don't pay your energy bill. We've answered some common questions from what we're hearing on our advice line. So these are some examples. So what happens if I don't pay? Should I stop paying? I can't afford to pay, what should I do? And how do I pay what I can? As some examples there. So we're not advising people not to pay, but we are telling them that they should contact their energy supplier to look at payment plans. Sometimes you don't need to call them, as we're hearing that it's taking hours to get through. If you're capable, you can go online and have a web chat, for example. But it's always best to notify them if you are struggling, so that they have a record that you've made contact with them. We've also been training our energy advisors recently to sort of help people get ready for winter. We've secured funding to buy winter warmth packs. So it's about £100 worth of warm items that we're giving away. And we're currently developing a fact sheet at the moment, sort of keeping yourself or one room warm. And we're giving advice that we never expected to be giving, really. And I just thought I'd finish by reading out a few statements from people ringing our advice line about what they're going to do to reduce their costs. So going to bed early to stay warm, only heating one room, avoiding using central heating, spending the day in a cafe or a library, cooking using alternative sources, or even not cooking at all, inviting friends and family into the home, using unsafe, unserviced heating appliances or inappropriate devices like ovens to stay warm, cutting back on electricity and using candles, leaving the curtains closed all day, formal borrowing from credit cards and loans, and then informal borrowing from friends or loan sharks, marking the bath to reduce the amount of water you use each time, showering away from home, using workplaces or leisure centres, cutting back on personal hygiene products, and deciding not to pay your water bill in order to pay other higher priority bills. So I think in sort of summary, we're experiencing high waiting times to speak to an energy caseworker. It's currently months that people are having to wait, and it is getting longer. So people need support now. So I feel like we need a discussion on a national funding for proper energy advice and support, with support for long-term casework. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I think the discussion needs to kind of go further than that as well. There's so much that the government needs to be looking into that I'm sure will be addressed in our policy reviews that Peter Smith and his team will be doing over the course of today. The lack of foresight, everything seems to be immediate, doesn't it? So even down to not just advisors, you're looking at measures. If measures programs are struggling to take off now because they've been so stop and start over the years, nobody now wants to join in and be part of that. Everything just needs to come together and be given a proper full-term plan. It, 10, 20 years needs to be put in place to deliver on. Very practical advice there, measures being put in place to provide a safe space for people this winter. Vanessa said in the chat there, fantastic, but hard to believe that this is required in the 21st century. Yeah, kind of really gives you goosebumps, doesn't it, to think that this is what we're coming to. Libraries, warm hubs, bus routes, tube routes have always been something that we've known have been ongoing now. What concerns me is these places you're saying will be open regardless. When they get hit with that bill though, then how do they afford it? So having the means to seek support and grants to cover that cost is a must. I'm going to pass now on to our final speaker, who is Laura McGadie. She is from the Energy Saving Trust.
Hi, Lesley, and hello, everybody. And what we're seeing totally chimes with what everybody else has said already, this panel, and I think we're all absolutely aligned on what we feel needs to happen. I was going to share slides, but actually I'll just share one near the end and just briefly talk through from Energy Saving Trust's point of view and what we are seeing. So we are an independent organisation focused on addressing climate change, but that is, as part of that, is delivering the wider benefits of clean energy to everyone. As we transition to net zero, we have to take everyone with us. So we definitely see that tackling fuel poverty and getting through the current situation and helping people through it is a crucial part of that. One element of our work is providing tailored, impartial advice to households, and much of that is in support of people who are struggling. And the big programmes we deliver is through Home Energy Scotland for the Scottish Government, and in Wales we provide advice under the NEST programme, which is the Welsh Government's fuel poverty programme. We provide a number of other services as well, but just to give you an idea of scale, Home Energy Scotland supports 100,000 households a year. And it's not just phone advice. I think we're known for giving phone advice, but we actually give support in home as well. We have an energy carer element to Home Energy Scotland, and that, as you won't be surprised, is coming under more and more demand. We've seen demand for Home Energy Scotland services double in the 6 weeks over August, which is just unprecedented. That's not a time of year when we would normally see that level of demand. So our advisors, like all of you, are feeling the same level of pressure. And we really do believe as an organisation that we need more personally tailored advice available to households to address the unique issues, as Elizabeth said, that people are facing due to their personal circumstances as well as their property characteristics, to help them immediately with the situation they're in, but also to help them longer term, to support them to get to a place where they are protected a bit against these prices because they live in a warm, well-insulated house. So insulation programmes are going to be really critical to getting there, and we've got to keep pressure on that these insulation programmes need to happen, and we need to see more action on insulation now. And we believe that all households across the UK should have the same level of and access to support. So yeah, as I said, we've seen a massive increase in demand for advice from our services, and we work in partnership with a lot of local agencies, and they're seeing the same level of demand. So we're working with them to try and triage and support people as best we can through our partnership of support. And we're also seeing the same being hit. The organisations we fund through the Energy Redress Scheme are also experiencing a large increase in demand. We've also seen, particularly in Scotland, a real increase in demand from health charities and organisations coming to us to ask us to support both their staff as well as their patients and clients. So staff in organisations that maybe never were faced with questions around energy advice from their clients are now being asked these questions. So we're helping provide those organisations with information and advice and support on where people can get the help available so that they can enable their patients and clients to access that support, but also putting in place referral routes so they can quickly get people to the support available through Home Energy Scotland. Under the Ofgem redress scheme, we ran phase 2 round 1 really quickly to enable projects to gear up before winter, and we saw in those applications that charities who applied really thought about the scale of the problem, and we saw bigger projects designed to help tackle that scale. So it's great to see, and I encourage charities to apply for the funding that's available. I'll come on to that a bit later. And we are mobilising new energy advice services. So we are seeing that local authorities and others are seeing need and asking us to respond and provide more advice, which is good. But we need a real we need this to be national and available to everybody. So just talking about providing effective advice, I think I'm drawing out 3 key things which chimes with what other speakers have mentioned. Well-being of advisors is absolutely critical. It's our advisors who are the listeners, and that can make such a difference to a person who's struggling. And we see from feedback from people who use our services again and again, just having somebody who was prepared to take the time and listen to me and have the patience and then tell me right now what I can do, what will help me right now, makes such a difference. And we have to help strengthen advisor resilience so that advisors don't feel they have to take on every single problem of everybody. They can help people, and helping advisors focus on what they can do and not what they can't will help them get through this too. So everything Rachel said about having somebody to speak to after a difficult conversation, having time out after difficult cases. And we've got an employee assistance scheme in place as well, which is an external provider that any of our advisors or any staff can call, which is confidential and just help people through things. We've also done mental health training for advisors, which I think is really important. So that's the first thing. Second thing is the importance of accurate, clear advice content. So keeping that up to date, as others have said, is super important. And giving the advisors time to absorb that new information, so training them and providing them with tools to help them access that quickly when they're in a situation and they need to get to the information quickly. So we provide our advisors with resources to help them quickly find that information. And we also listen to the advice we're giving and make sure we're coaching and supporting advisors throughout, because so they don't feel left on their own dealing with these situations. And then the third thing is this importance of working in partnership with others. So there's so many organisations who can offer support. Joining that up to best support households is one of the things that we can all help with. And just finally, to end on 3 sources of support that I want to flag. The first I've mentioned already, it's the Ofgem redress scheme. And that's funds targeted at energy consumers in vulnerable situations. It's aimed at charities. There's a new round open at the moment. There's £22 million available under that round. And the deadline for applications is the 6th of October. There's likely to be another round in around about January, but obviously the sooner we can get that money out the door to support people, the better. As part of the Ofgem redress scheme, second thing is tools and resources that have been created by energy advice projects are shared on the Ofgem redress website. So I would encourage people to access those, have a look. There may be information that supports your advisors. Also watch out for energy redress scheme webinars on best practice and information exchange, and they're free to join. And then the third thing I wanted to mention, I don't know if it's worth me trying to just quickly share my screen here. I think I'll probably get it wrong if I try, so I'll just mention it. I can share information later. But as the Energy Saving Trust has created a charity energy advice portal. So that provides free resources for staff and materials that can be shared with clients and households that we keep up to date. So I hope most of you will have had a message about it already. We're adding new materials all the time. We've acted on feedback from you that you want a wider range of accessible formats. So we've already started to put more materials up. So for example, energy advice videos in British Sign Language. So do tell us what more you need. Do engage with us. Let us know what you need, and we'll aim to provide more resources. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Laura. That was brilliant. I think you've given us the final thoughts from the end of the session there, which is brilliant. I've just noted them down so I can use them as well. Brilliant. I'm not sure how the next part of this is going to go, purely due to the fact so many people have joined us today. We were expecting 40 to 50 people, and there's been over 180, nearly 190 people on this call at any point. It's over to you now. What we want are questions for the panel, for each other. If you want to share best practice, if you have any links or resources that you want to point people in the direction of, this is all about how we now go forward and create this effective advice giving service throughout this winter. There's quite a lot of chat going on with caseworkers who are clearly on the call, sharing cases and difficulties they're having. I'm going to bring that in here and ask, we're saying, this is coming out from everybody who's talked now, advisor wellbeing and looking after you is what we need to be doing. What do you need us to do for you? It would be good to get that feedback as well on this. If I could ask, there are 2 ways of doing this. You can put a question in the chat. If you could put who the question's aimed at, who you're representing today, or if you do want to raise a hand, we'll be keeping an eye on the participant list, so we'll be able to see if you have any questions. And if you do it that way, if you would like to say your name, who you're representing, and again, who your question is for. Should I open it to the chat for now? Peter, I know that you've been keeping an eye on it. If there are any questions in there that have come up that we can approach while people are thinking, and then start putting hands up here. I'm just gonna.
So I'm just sorry, just checking that everyone can hear me. Just unmuting my mic. I think what's happening in the chat is a lot of people are answering questions. A lot of people are putting in great answers to the questions that people are raising. And one of the things that the chat is, I think, highlighting is just what Lesley said, is that, there are so many people. We have developed in a kind of fuel poverty infrastructure of advisors across a range of different organisations in the communities that are doing amazing and invaluable work, but who've never found it harder to respond to the crisis that we're in now. So this opportunity for us to get together and share our experience seems to me to be kind of invaluable. And it seems to me that this is something that we need to ask, that there should be a space where organisations like those of us that are represented on this panel and in this session can do exactly that, you know, kind of share experiences as a way of supporting each other to get through what's going to be a really, really difficult next 2 or 3 years. I just wondered if people agreed or had thoughts as to how that might work in practice. Rob, you've got your hand up. I just noticed. Rob Howard.
Hello, yeah, I don't know if you can see me actually. Yeah, I think the camera's on. Yeah, I'm a trustee of NEA and I'm also a consultant in public health in Leicester. It seems to me that one of the things that's kind of almost paralysing is the scale of the problem and the number of people that need advice, and that's a lot of the talk is really around that unprecedented level. So I'm wondering if there's some merit in thinking about how we can come together, not just the people on this call, but everyone across the country who is in a position to be able to deliver basic energy advice. We can use this concept that we have in public health called proportionate universalism, where everyone needs a certain level of service, and some people then need more intensive services depending on the levels of their issues and the problems. But can we kind of use our collective will to almost create an army of advisors across the country from multiple different sectors, multiple different organisations, with a kind of maybe a single source of support for that large offer to offer basic advice to people, and then have this more specialist support across the country for those that need more high-level advice. It's a kind of plea out there really to everyone to sing, is there a way of coordinating this in a better way, and what do the panel think of that as a kind of idea to generate a bigger response?
Should we target that towards Elizabeth first? She's had more time to rest during the rest of the chat that's gone on.
Thank you. So I'm thinking about if there are any parallels between the kind of internal boards and things to be used to answer and pose these questions that are kind of more accessible. I've certainly seen kind of new links come up in the chat that are resources that I wasn't aware of. So I wonder if there's something that is that kind of more open space that can almost be kind of there all the time to share. I mean, I rely a lot on LinkedIn and Twitter, which feels like that's not the right area to be to kind of have a shared space, maybe a LinkedIn group. So what I'm thinking is, I agree. I think an area to connect is really useful. I think there's a lot of options which are free and online, but I do think it would be great to have some boundaries in place so it's not kind of public consumption, it is specialist consumption. So I am very happy to have a nudge on what from someone who's more technically literate than me, what that might be. I'm going to go in with LinkedIn group because that's the only thing I can think that ticks all those boxes right now.
LinkedIn used to be a fantastic resource, and then a few years ago it just became Facebook for the kind of industry world, which is just a bit tedious. If we can make that work again, that would be brilliant, because I used to find that a really good source of information. Rachel, do you agree with that, or is there anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I think there's a real piece around regional. There's probably enough sort of regional bodies around the room that actually could probably look at this. So we certainly cover the West Midlands. Obviously, I know CSE has had some energy advisor work that Ian's been doing in the past, where energy advisors have got together. So maybe it's just perhaps building on that, working on that together as organisations, just to provide that some of that support piece. Because I have to say, you know, as great as things like LinkedIn are, actually, even if the get together is an online get together, I think it's really important to be able to have some open discussions, and it just doesn't, the nuance doesn't necessarily come across when you're typing something of what you're trying to say. So I do wonder whether there's a place to have something that is, whether it be online or more of a, you know, an actual physical get together, because I think it's a really valuable piece, because I think it's really important to support advisors at this time, because it is the most challenging area of work. The energy advice piece is horrendous at the moment, but that's not just, it's, you know, that whole wider piece around money advice as well is equally as challenging. So, you know, I think there would be a real opportunity to perhaps work together to do more of this.
And how about you, Paul? What's CSE doing?
Yeah, I agree with Rachel. I think the advice providers, groups and networks that we've been doing fairly recently have been really well received. But also I think where we hadn't touched on it before mainly, and what we've been discussing a bit today around supporting our advisors. I think not only could we come together as organisations to look at the support for our sort of customer base, but also learn from each other's experiences on how we're supporting our staff during this time as well, because you know, we're seeing more and more calls to our advice line where people are having suicidal thoughts, and you know, as an energy advisor, that's kind of not really what you signed up for going back some years, and it's becoming more and more prevalent now. So we absolutely need to ensure that we're supporting our staff as best as we can, and we don't have all the answers, so it'd be great to come together as an advice network to share those ideas for sure.
Thank you, Paul. Sorry, Rachel.
I just to add to Paul, I have to say we've had the number of suicidal calls that we've had was greater than we've ever experienced, and particularly from that sort of single male group. And our advice team, some of them just understandably don't know what to do with those sort of calls. How, you know, hence why we've put quite a lot of support in place. But that is a real challenge, and I think if we're not careful, we'll lose people. Will leave because you know the job market's very, very buoyant out there at the moment. So you know, people don't need that kind of pressure, and let alone volunteers, having a volunteer take that sort of call. So I think there's we've really got to step up and work together on this to support staff.
Agreed. Laura, do you want to come in with anything more, or can I pose a question from the chat to you instead?
Yeah, no, I think I agree. I agree with everything that's been said. And I think the thing we're also seeing is just this demand from other organisations who've never really had to support people who are asking them questions about energy advice, but just whether if we can coordinate a response and work together, whether we can actually make that stretch a bit further than just the traditional energy advice providers, because the demand is such for this support and help that the further we can make that reach, the better.
I agree. And I think that has to go for all of the schemes or lack of schemes that are currently running, bring in their support staff as well, so they understand the difficulties we're having. For example, we've got cases that come in. We're trying to put this is in the chat. Trust fund applications, when you're given 3 months to provide a income and expenditure statement to get all benefits advice and any bills that have to be within this 3-month period. A phone call to Step Change the other day, and their waiting list is currently 3 to 4 months. So how do we get that? Because they automatically throw out the application at that point. It just needs to be bigger and encompass everybody who is involved in some way. There's one in the chat, I think this has kind of been answered in what you've said. What is complex casework? I'll start with you, Laura, and then we'll work backwards through, but I think we've kind of highlighted why it becomes complex quite quickly.
Yeah, well, we do a similar sort of frontline advice, and then if the person we're speaking to needs more help then can be immediately provided by an advisor who's trained across a whole load of different areas of energy saving, then we will pass them on to an energy carer and put them in touch with an energy carer. So I guess in our world, a complex case is one that then needs that extra support from an energy carer, and it can be because of additional, it might need they just need somebody in home to help them. Where we can help somebody over the phone, we will, because it allows us to help more people. But where somebody needs in-home support, we'll give them the in-home support. But it could be that they have, as you say, a number of different issues that are actually going to take linking up with different services as well to help them through the situation. So it's very hard to answer that question because it's so individual. But it's our advisors knowing at what point there is other help available within the service that they no longer can provide, and that it needs to go on to the next level, just to make sure that we're reaching as many people as possible, as effectively as possible.
Agreed. Paul, do you think that as well? I saw you nodding there.
Yeah, for sure. So our sort of advice line is sort of the triage, if you like, for more complex energy advice or financial advice. So if the advisor on the phone feels like that person needs additional support that they can't provide on a one phone call, we sort of internally refer it to a caseworker who has no time limit to offer support for that person, and will be with them on their journey with whatever it is that we're trying to support them with, whether that is, you know, heating and insulation, or financial energy bill problems. And it's someone that the person that can talk to, can ring up, they can text, and our caseworkers are there then to help with the issues, but also, you know, be there as sort of a shoulder to sort of lean on a bit as well. And whilst, you know, that's why we're talking about as well supporting our advisors, because again, you know, they're not social workers, although they are doing social work, and we're recognizing that we need to ensure that our staff are well supported in that as well.
Absolutely agree. Charlotte, you've got your hand up there. Do you want to come up with a different question?
Hi, yes, it was a different question. My name's Charlotte. I work for Leicestershire County Council within the Public Health Department. We have our own warm and home service. It's quite a small team, but it's expanding. Thank you so much to all the speakers for your really valuable information. One of the things that we're kind of really struggling with as a team is residents that we take referrals, we receive referrals from, are not able to follow the advice that we're giving them. So they're just not in those particular situations. So I think it was Paul, but I can't actually be sure, that gave a list of examples, things such as, say, showering out the home, or spending days out, or kind of cutting off kind of central heating just aren't feasible for a lot of the people. And so we have this kind of as robust kind of list of advice as we can, but it's just not kind of meeting the majority of people that we're interacting with. And on a slightly separate note, sorry, being cheeky, asking two questions, but there was I think it was also Paul again who mentioned kind of having advice packs and leaflets. We're planning on doing something similar for Leicestershire County Council, but I was just wondering if there was any guidance on how those are being distributed, and kind of how it's decided who is receiving those packs due to the majority of people being in crisis.
Okay, Paul, I'll ask you to take the first one. So when residents have made all the cuts that they can possibly make, what advice, where do we go from there?
That's a really good question, and I think at the moment we're still trying to figure a lot of that out as energy advice organisations. If they sort of reach their limit with what they can do, as I said in my sort of talk earlier, our advisors we're having sort of brainstorming sessions every so often at work, where we're trying to come up with different ideas. So these winter warmth packs that I was talking about, that they contain electric throws, that, you know, like a heated blanket basically. They contain gloves and hats and all these sort of socks, all the things that you know, we can give away. And I think we're slowly sort of adapting our advice to the current situation, and we're developing our resources to look at that at the moment. So yeah, it's really tricky, and I don't think there's this easy answer to it at the moment.
So for those of you who also are doing the winter warmth packs, so I'm just going to pose this to anybody who jumps in first from the panel, how are you looking to distribute those?
So we're at CSE, our caseworkers have access to those, and it's just on a case-by-case basis. So if they feel that that person needs one of our winter warmth packs, then they can send one out to them, or go and hand deliver them to that household. There's no criteria that we're imposing. It's a case of the caseworker building that rapport with the customer and then deciding that they need one.
That's a very similar way to the way we're doing it as well. Elizabeth, did you want to come in on that?
Yes, there's two things. One, to kind of a plea to learn from past experience, and a second, a plea to ignore past experience. So what we can learn from past experience. it's really try to go to places where people are already at. So there will absolutely be a need for warm packs and other support to be able to be provided through kind of formal funded energy advice. However, we know that there's going to be a mismatch between the amount of funded advice out there and the number of people who need it. And we all know that it's a longer wait than we would like. So for every pack or every bit of information or every resource which is available in a kind of more formal setting, we know that it can be quicker, and certainly is really needed to have those packs in those warm zones like libraries, in GP surgeries where people are already going. You heard about kind of challenges around shame, around reaching out for support from people this morning. And the closer you can get to where people are, the more likely they are going to be able to access that support. And then a plea to not learn from experience. I'm finding it really hard to be having these conversations right now about sending gloves, hats and electric blankets. And I just urge everyone to remember, we know that the response to this should be structural. No one should be looking at Martin Lewis's heat the person, not the home advice. That's not where we should be. But it is where we are. And I think that there is something distinct about this winter where we have to have that thick skin and say, we have seen so many people be criticised over the years for encouraging them to wear jumpers, gloves, hats indoors. That will probably happen again, but it will make such a big difference to people to get that advice and to get those resources into their hands. And so I would say that this might not be the advice that we want to be giving this winter, but it is absolutely needed.
Thank you, Elizabeth. There's probably more questions, but what I'm going to do is wrap that up there because we are approaching the end of the session now, and just go back through our panelists and ask for something that we want to take away. I think from what I've heard and what's going on in the chat, I think the advisor wellbeing obviously is still a big thing for me, and there's a big push for advisor forums. How do we deliver that? I've seen that delivered elsewhere. I don't know if CSE were part of that at some point, Paul, and if that kind of tailed off as it often does. And we just need to push and bring in more partners to deliver rather than one person, one organisation taking responsibility, because that's where the burden comes from these things and they stop. Someone's asking for a hub of advice, a library advice and information gathering. So Simple Energy, the website that the government put forward, was supposed to be that hub. It just seems to be a bit of a dumping ground of information. There's no structure to it. So I just wonder if we need to go back and reshape that, or whether one of us here on the panel again takes that. I know that we've already mentioned, I think it was Laura said that there is stuff there available for advisors. We've also had internal discussions about things like Google Maps and how do we use them. So we get all the partners to come on and you pinpoint and drop locations of where things are taking place, which could be quite useful for us to then support people. And also just bringing in the mental wellbeing training for all the team and keep that going, not just have it as a one-off, it needs to be regular. So they're my takeaways from this. Should we start with Elizabeth again and work our way back through in that order? Sorry, I got a robot version of that. Could someone pop it in the chat and someone else go first on the response? No problem. Did I go robotic for everybody there, or was it? Rachel, did you catch that?
I did, Lesley. Yeah. I think it might just been Elizabeth that went a bit robotic. So yeah, I can happily start on that. And I have to say, I think there's just looking for the support for the chat there. I think the key thing from our side is around the support for advisors. I think that's a really, really key one. Just to make sure they feel supported, but they have access to the information, and that information is clear, consistent, and available to all, equally as the information we get out to our consumers that we're all trying to support, that we can get that information out. And the complexity of cases has changed. I think someone talked about what is a complex caseworker, and I think we based ours on the NHS's social prescriber model. So, and I think it's a really good point that we all have to look at for the people that we're dealing with, that the person's at the middle of all the crisis that we're dealing with, and they'll move in and out of that concentric circle of rings. So sometimes they'll need less advice, sometimes they'll need really intensive advice, and that sometimes can be 12 months, it can be 18 months, but really to move that person, to empower them in the long term, that's what we're going to have to do, and really almost go back to basics for a lot of householders, and that good old what is a kilowatt hour of energy, so they can start to make better decisions, because actually most people aren't aware of what a kilowatt hour of gas is or a kilowatt hour of electricity is and the costs. And I think we're probably going back to some of that really basic stuff, which is really difficult to do when you're in a crisis, because actually you just want to be warm, and thinking about what this means and this means is you know, a real challenge.
I agree, Rachel, and I think, but now is the time, as I said earlier, people are listening, they actually want this advice, and that you know, a subject which has kind of turned people off has now become very focused. So it's a very good point that we need to push this. Paul, would you like to sum up yours?
Yeah, thanks, Lesley. Yeah, I think to just reiterate the support that we're going to need to give our staff, I think is really key. Also, the advice providers sessions, I think we need to continue to do those probably more regularly, to come together, share knowledge, resource, funding, grants, that kind of thing, so that we can give a holistic sort of overview of the support that's available to people, and potentially we need national funding for advice organisations. I think we need to go back to that that sort of advice where you could ring a number and, you know, get through. Doesn't matter where you live, because at the moment we're, you know, it is sort of postcode lottery. Sometimes with energy advice, depending on what's out there. So yeah, that would be my sort of summary.
Brilliant. Thank you, Laura.
I'm at risk of repeating what others have just said. So I'm just going to say absolutely yes to everything you've said, and let's work together. And, you know, us on the panel even as a starter, but I would like to hear more of what people need, because it might be something that we as Energy Saving Trust are able to provide, it might not, but we're very happy to work with others and look at how we can work together.
Thank you. Elizabeth, you've come back, so are you able to finalise?
So 2 things from me. Firstly, on advisor wellbeing, those snatches of conversation with a line manager or a floor walker or whatever the online equivalent is to decompress after those crisis calls is absolutely vital and very well backed from research also. It can be less than 5 minutes sometimes, and it makes an enormous difference in the moment to that advisor. And the second thing, I love the idea of using Google Maps to find those hubs where people can connect. We've heard about the Bristol model there, which is an exceptional one to kind of get that holistic support and those really smooth interactions. And that feels like a really a relatively quick way of connecting on the ground, because the closer we can be to the ground, the closer we are to the people who need us.
Perfectly said, thank you. I'm going to wrap that up there because we are bang on at 1 o'clock, which is fantastic. I would like to offer a huge thanks for our panel today. I think the insights they're coming through in the chat, how appreciative people are of that we're recognising the need, that we're taking it on board, and that we are trying and we'll do something about this. If we were live and in Birmingham as hoped, we would give our panellists a massive round of applause. Because we can't do that, if you want to use your emoji function to do that, that would be fantastic. If not, can I thank everybody for joining us today. We've stuck in the 180 mark all the way through this chat. It shows it's needed. We will continue it. Thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you in the next sessions as the conference continues.
We'll see you again at 2:15 in the main webinar, and the links are on the website. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.